All
So
right.
the other show is Red Hat, which I want you to lead with definitely because it is definitely starting to get outside of my space. But I do have a couple comments on some of their announcements.
Yeah, obviously Red Hat, an open source market leader, as well as one that is core to managing infrastructure in the IT world. I think they made several announcements that were interesting at Red Hat Summit and were comprehensible to me as a non-IT infrastructure manager. One was simply about being on Oracle Cloud. I think every company is starting to realize that we've got to be on Oracle Cloud. They are a legitimate alternative and increasingly growing in scale. They have learned probably from the missteps that IBM made in trying to be a major cloud provider and are more careful with the steps they're taking. And now Red Hat is saying, yes, we have to be on Oracle Cloud as well. Second announcement I thought was really interesting was about Red Hat introducing the concept of policy as code on Red Hat Ansible. The idea that you can get more technical policies and develop them as code and then update them as code in a more scalable way. That way you can enforce policies across all of your data and application environments more easily rather than having to do this in a manual configuration process, which has been the de rigueur like standard for decades, right? When we think about GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance, and the need to manage policies, it is an extremely painful and manual process, very legalistic in accounting, in nature. You're popping off all of those little boxes and switching all those little toggles on an application or platform specific basis a lot of the time to try to make sure that you have the policies managed correctly. So simply moving to a code-based model there, I see is very valuable and kind of in line with what we were talking about with previous announcements in managing policy and workflows in a more programmatic and scalable fashion. So I find that it really interesting. And then probably the other announcement that really caught my eye was around Red Hat and Elastic working together for managing retrieval augmented generation. We've talked about retrieval augmented generation a fair bit in previous shows as an important way of being able to manage generative AI. And having Red Hat and Elastic working together to provide both of the data infrastructure as well as the hardware infrastructure to support AI customization is an important piece of the puzzle because right now we are seeing extreme fragmentation. There are so many potential vendors you can work with to try to make AI work, and simply having Red Hat throw their hat into the ring and say, we are going to make your life a little bit easier if you actually want to do all this stuff in a cost-effective manner without having to figure out 38 different pieces of the puzzle to put together. I think that is useful productivity, a piece of productivity from for IT trying to actually put all this into production.
Yeah, I agree, and I think well. So first, I want to comment on something you said the at the very beginning, talking about the Oracle piece. What I think is remarkable, sort of separate from these announcements, is
Mhm.
that we've talked a lot about these large companies acquiring other companies that tend to sort of go there and if not die, stagnate. And I mean, I believe this is true of many of the IBM acquisitions. I think it is absolutely remarkable how untrue that has been in Red Hat's case. That Red
Mhm.
Hat seems to be the tail wagging the dog to positive effect. Red Hat has remained incredibly relevant, still continuing to lead the charge across a lot of different dimensions, and that's remarkable and
Yeah, I just
positive.
think
So
about Broadcom VMware right now as a counter example of how quickly it can get messed up if you don't have your eye on the ball.
yeah, well, and so this Oracle announcement is a key part of that. Right? I mean, clearly IBM has its own cloud that it at least likes to think is competitive in the market and is competing with Oracle, and yet here Red Hat says we have to be playing nicely and being a part of it. So I think
Mhm.
that's a testament. And if I'm a CIO, I take that as a signal and a really positive signal that this is an organization I can continue to invest in because they're sending all the right things. They're recognizing that they're not just part of this IBM monolith and they're recognizing my reality, which I think is my big takeaway when I look at this is that I've been harping on in the DX report sort of countering all the hype about dealing with the pragmatism of all of this, dealing with keeping it real on how to do this. We've talked a little bit about some of this today, with some of the challenges with just addressing what's actually happening. And one of the things that I love about um, Red Hat's messaging here is they're talking a little bit about this idea of at least a term I don't think I've heard, called what they're calling hybrid AI, right?
Mhm.
This idea that, hey, you're running hybrid IT environments, you're running hybrid cloud. Guess what? Your AI environment's also going to be hybrid. And I think it makes complete sense. It's obvious to anyone who thinks about it for 2 seconds. And yet, almost all the stuff we're talking about in the AI hype stream is acting like it's this whole separate thing. And so they made some announcements that I thought were very, very important around sort of that pragmatic hybrid approach. So
Mhm.
one is some new enhancements that will allow you to serve models at the edge, which I think is going to be super, super critical. They're talking about it in, remote, where there's either intermittent access or air gap network environments. Super critical for actually applying this stuff and making sense of it. This idea of model serving, where you're have an environment that isn't just serving up Gen AI type models, but actually can do predictive as well. Again, very, very pragmatic, that we need a way to manage these environments cohesively, not treating them as they're these sort of separate areas. And a bunch of these other sort of similar things. They get very deep in the weeds. Frankly, most of what Red Hat does is too technical for me. I do question, to a certain extent, my only sort of big thing is so much of what they do is focused on the very largest organizations, that many enterprises, this is sort of beyond them. But I do think that it's important, because it's going to have, at the very least, the sort of trickle down effect, as we see, or the organizations take this out of abstraction layers, make it simpler for smaller organizations to deploy, because this is where it's all going. It's about, how do you start making this stuff pragmatic, and so you can apply it. Because if you can't apply it and actually do something with it, then all those crazy business valuations we were talking about earlier are just never going to come to fruition. And so that's what I really loved about what they're doing, and that this was, again, I'm so sensitive. Probably why I was so hard on ServiceNow. I'm so sensitive right now to just this, kind of hand waving hype, and I want to see people that are doing things that are actually applying it in meaningful ways. And I thought that Red Hat did that here.
Yeah, and I think just to dig one layer deeper, I think that Red Hat using Kubernetes to support AI on Kubernetes is important, because that portability is going to be important. You're going to want to move models between the cloud and your servers, and perhaps even to the edge over time, depending on how quickly computing continues to scale and grow. I think Codeflare is very important in terms of managing task orchestration, supporting the monitoring of these workflows. So again, we are talking about the very basic blocking and tackling of treating AI as a production application, and uh, having infrastructure to support that, no matter where that be, whether it be on the edge or in your core or in the cloud. All of that shouldn't matter at the end of the day, because you should be able to make business decisions about where your model should be, whether you're governed or whether you're trying to support very specific remote environments. None of that should really matter at the end of the day if you have the model that you're looking for. And that is where Red Hat is preparing for the future. And honestly, these may not be investments that pay off this year, but I feel like they will be extremely important next year once CIOs realize the mess that they are in. And unfortunately, a lot of CIOs are going to find themselves in this situation, not through any fault of their own, really, but because they've been asked to experiment and they've been pushed by the business to do specific things with AI.
Well, and it just that there's so much unknown. I mean, everything is still changing so fast that, we talk about technical debt, and technical debt is often being viewed as this, oh, I made short-sighted decisions. But a lot of technical debt comes from this sort of environment, where it's not that they're short-sighted. We just have no line of sight to what's actually going to happen. And
Mhm.
so you place some bets, you make some gambles, or you do some experimentation. And in doing so, because that's how enterprises work, they get entrenched if they work. And I now have some technical debt that I'm going to have to deal with. And so I do think there's going to be a whole lot of operationalizing this that's going to get very challenging. And it's going to get very nuanced. So I think, organizations like Red Hat, that I think are sort of getting down into those weeds and starting to provide these layers and these tools to make it more manageable, I think is critical. And I think it's also, so you talked about long term. I think that we're going to see this this coming of age. Is that the right story? I don't know. No, this comeuppance. That's the
Mhm.
word. um,